They whispered my name, and something answered.
The night was quiet, too quiet. I sat alone, the only sound my own breathing, when it began. A whisper, faint, almost polite. At first, I thought it was the wind, or perhaps a trick of my mind. But then it called my name. Slowly, clearly, as if it had been waiting for me. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch toward me, leaning closer. I froze, heart hammering. I wanted to speak, to ask who it was. But no words came. And in that silence, I understood something terrible. I was no longer alone. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak in the floorboards, every distant thud, it wasn't normal. I tried to record the whispers, to capture proof. But my devices betrayed me. Phones died suddenly, cameras froze, even the old tape recorder played nothing but static. Then came the signal. Not through sound, not through sight, but in the spaces between. A flicker on my screen, a pattern in the shadows, a rhythm in the hum of electricity. It was as if the air itself had begun to speak, carefully, deliberately. And then, it was unmistakable. A symbol, etched in the static, glimmering for a moment before vanishing. Something was reaching out. Something had been waiting for me to notice. I realized, with a sinking certainty, this was not random. This was a call, and it was meant for me. The nights grew longer. Not in hours, but in the way shadows seemed to stretch, reaching farther than they had any right to. Every corner of my home felt unfamiliar, as if the darkness had rearranged itself while I wasn't looking. And the flickers began. At first, they were subtle. A light trembling in the hall, a reflection that moved against its source, a curtain fluttering though no wind stirred. I told myself it was imagination. I told myself exhaustion and fear were conspiring to trick me. But the room knew my doubts, it fed on them. The flickers became patterns. A rhythm in the darkness, like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Shadows bent in impossible ways, stretching toward me when I turned my head. Once, I saw a figure in the corner of the living room. I blinked, and it was gone. The floorboards creaked beneath invisible feet, a whisper of movement just beyond the edge of hearing. I tried to leave, to escape the suffocating awareness that I was being watched. But the darkness was patient. It didn't chase me. It waited. It knew I would linger, because something deep inside me wanted to see it, wanted to understand. One night, I saw it clearly, if that is the word for it. A shadow, taller than any human, slithering across the walls. Not moving, but somehow alive. Eyes, or the illusion of them, glimmered briefly, and I felt them pierce me, reading my every thought, every fear, every secret I had buried long ago. I wanted to run, but my body refused. The flickers danced around me like a cruel performance, showing me visions of things I had never known, rooms that shouldn't exist, faces that twisted and melted into shapes that were almost, but not quite, human. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The shadows retreated to their corners, leaving the room feeling empty yet charged with a presence I could not deny. I realized then, it wasn't just watching. It was studying, waiting, learning. And I understood, with a cold certainty, that the flickers were not just in the dark. The dark itself had become alive. It was patient. It was eternal. And it had noticed me. The morning light did nothing to calm me. Even in daylight, the house felt wrong. Shadows pooled in corners that had never held them before, and the silence seemed heavy, like it was waiting for something. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, a mind unraveling from too many sleepless nights, but deep down, I knew better. I was never truly alone. Something was watching. At first, it was subtle. A flicker in the hallway, a movement in the edge of my vision, a reflection that didn't match my own. I tried to record it, to catch proof, but every device failed me. Cameras froze mid-frame. Phones died in my hand. Even the old tape recorder, once reliable, played only static. And yet, I could feel it, patient, waiting. The days bled into nights, and the watching grew bolder. Shadows bent in impossible ways, stretching toward me when I wasn't looking. The air trembled with a rhythm, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I began to see it, glimpses of a tall, impossibly thin figure that seemed to defy all sense of reality. Its limbs twisted in angles no human body could manage, and its presence alone made the hairs on my arms rise. It did not move toward me. It did not need to. It simply existed, aware of me in ways I could not comprehend. I started noticing the distortions in ordinary things. Books moved slightly from shelves, chairs shifted, as if something unseen had brushed against them. Screens flickered with faces that weren't there, whispering half-words that slipped away before I could understand. Even mirrors betrayed me. My reflection would sometimes stare back with empty eyes, lips moving in silence, showing expressions that were not my own. And within me, I felt intrusions, moments of lost time, thoughts that weren't mine, urges I had never known. I realized the boundaries of who I was had begun to blur, and whatever watched me was testing them. Then came the nights I could no longer sleep. Every creak, every distant thump, every flicker of light made my heart hammer. In my dreams, I saw it clearly, towering, silent, observing. And when I woke, soaked in sweat, I felt it still in the room, patient, unyielding. I understood then that it wasn't hunting me, it didn't need to. It had all the time in the world, and I was under its gaze, living inside its scrutiny. One night, a voice unlike anything I had heard before filled the room, not a whisper, not a hum, but a sound that vibrated through the very air, low and impossibly old. You should not see me. You should not know that I exist. It didn't shout. It didn't beg. It informed, and in that moment, the silence that followed pressed down like a weight, heavier than any shadow. Desperate for answers, I searched old books, photographs, and texts, anything that might explain this entity. Everywhere I looked, I found traces, accounts of disappearances, sightings, whispers from decades ago, all describing the same sensation, something eternal, patient, and endlessly observant. And each account reflected back a truth I could no longer deny. I had been marked long before I even knew this thing existed. Now, standing alone in my darkened room, I stare into the shadows, feeling the gaze that has followed me for days, weeks, perhaps longer. I whisper to myself, trying to hold on to reason, it's just in my head, it has to be, but the shadows respond. They move subtly, impossibly, in ways I do not control. And then I hear it, my name spoken not by lips, but by the darkness itself. I realize, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that I am never alone. It has been waiting. And it has finally noticed me. The whispers never stopped. They grew louder at times, though never loud enough to be fully understood. They came through the static of radios, the flicker of screens, the hum of electricity itself. I tried to ignore them, to pretend it was all in my mind, but deep down I knew better. Something was speaking. Something old. Something patient. At first, the messages were fragments, half-words, distorted phrases, syllables that meant nothing but felt like secrets I wasn't meant to know. Yet there was a rhythm to them, a pulse that threaded through my waking hours and my dreams alike. Every night, I would lie awake, listening, hoping to catch a clue, fearing what I might hear. Then came the patterns. Not spoken words, but arrangements of light and shadow, subtle movements that carried meaning I could just barely grasp. A flicker on the wall, the tap of a floorboard, the sudden skipping of a clock hand, all of it forming something I could not yet fully read. And when I tried to write it down, to make sense of it, the symbols shifted, dancing just out of reach. I began to wonder if the messages were alive. They spoke of things I could not name, places that could not exist, events that had never happened, or perhaps had yet to happen. My own memories seemed to bend, reshaping themselves to fit the patterns I saw in the shadows. I began to question the order of my own life. Had I truly lived these years, or had I only been a character in something far older and darker than I could comprehend? One night, the message became unmistakable. A voice, older than time, resonated through the walls, through the floor, through me. You were meant to hear. You were meant to answer. It did not ask. It did not demand. It stated. And in that statement was the weight of inevitability. I began to see the consequences of listening. Small things changed around me. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. Reflections of people, myself, friends, strangers, appeared and whispered, mimicking the voice of the beyond. Even my own thoughts felt invaded, colored by knowledge I could neither fully understand nor ignore. Every attempt to leave the house, to escape the attention, failed. Signals reached me wherever I went, in the hum of streetlights, the pattern of falling rain, the flicker of shadows in passing windows. The world itself had become a medium, and I was the recipient. I realized then that this entity, or whatever it was not communicating for my comfort, nor for any reason I could grasp. It was teaching, warning, testing. The messages from beyond carried intent, and the intent was clear. I was being prepared. Prepared for something I could not yet name, something that would demand more than my attention. And as I lay in the dark, listening to the flickers, the whispers, the impossible messages that threaded through the fabric of reality itself, I understood the most terrifying truth. It had been speaking long before I arrived, and it would continue long after I was gone. I was only one listener, one recipient of a message older than memory. And the moment I finally understood, the moment I truly listened, I knew it would be impossible to ever turn away. The messages were not just heard. They were felt. They were absorbed. They seeped into the bones, into the mind, into the very essence of being. And now, I could no longer tell where I ended, and where the message began. Something was waiting at the edge of comprehension, something ancient, something patient. And the messages had finally drawn me close enough to see it, or perhaps, to become part of it. The messages had become unbearable. They were no longer whispers in the dark, they were a weight pressing against my mind, urging me forward, compelling me to act. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to tear myself away from the signals that had invaded every corner of my life. But something deeper, something older than fear itself, insisted I follow. I could not resist. That night, I stepped into the darkness with nothing but a flickering flashlight and a sense of inevitability. The threshold was not a door, nor a line on the floor. It was the moment the world itself shifted beneath me. Shadows twisted into impossible forms, stretching and folding in ways that mocked logic. The air felt heavier, as if gravity had changed, as if the house, and perhaps reality itself, had grown stranger and more alive. I followed the signals, each pulse guiding me deeper into spaces I didn't recognize. Rooms I had walked past 100 times were now corridors that twisted upon themselves, opening into places that should not exist. Floors warped, walls leaned at impossible angles, ceilings stretched into blackness that had no end. And in the distance, I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. Knowing every step I took before I took it. I began to see things not meant for human eyes. Faces pressed against walls from the other side of reality, mouths whispering words that weren't my language, voices that made my blood run cold. Figures moved in the shadows, fleeting and fragmented, never fully present yet undeniably alive. It was a threshold not just of space, but of perception, where what I saw and what was real no longer aligned. The further I walked, the more my memories twisted. Childhood rooms shifted, familiar streets bled into unknown alleys, and the faces of people I loved warped into watchers, silent but ever present. I realized with a chill that my own life had been a thread in something far larger, and by stepping forward, I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The signals grew stronger, vibrating through the walls, the floors, the very air I breathed. And then it appeared, not in full, but in glimpses. A shadow larger than any human, taller than the ceiling, with a presence so immense it seemed to warp reality around it. Its gaze was not directed at me, but through me, into the essence of who I was. I felt it probe my thoughts, my memories, my fears. I understood then that this was not a creature in the ordinary sense, it was something beyond comprehension, something patient, eternal, and indifferent. I tried to speak, to call out, to demand an explanation. No words came. My voice seemed swallowed by the very darkness, leaving only the pounding of my heart and the creeping knowledge that I was in its domain, fully, irrevocably. And then the final step. I crossed into a space where light and shadow no longer followed the rules I knew. Time fractured. I saw moments of my past, present, and impossible futures layered atop each other, all under the watchful gaze of that presence. And I realized, with absolute certainty, that the threshold was not a place, it was a state of being. By stepping through, I had entered its world, and it had entered mine. I was no longer merely a witness. I was part of the pattern. The observer had become observed, and the observed had become part of something far greater, far darker than I could imagine. And as the air around me pulsed with the rhythm of the messages, the shadows thickened, closing in, waiting. I understood at last what the entity wanted, not to harm, not to scare, but to claim attention, to integrate, to make me part of its design. I had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. I had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. The air itself seemed to hum with awareness, alive with a presence I could neither name nor resist. Shadows moved with intention now, stretching, curling, shaping themselves into forms I could almost comprehend. And then it spoke, not through words, but through thought, through knowing, through the marrow of my bones. You understand now. You have seen. You have listened. The voice, or whatever it was everywhere and nowhere at once. It didn't ask, it did not demand. It stated. And within that statement lay the weight of inevitability. I felt a compulsion, a pressure to act, to answer. I understood, horrifyingly, that this was the bargain. I did not know the rules. I did not know the cost. But I knew the stakes. The entity offered understanding, knowledge, perhaps even power, but always with a price I could not yet comprehend. I tried to retreat, to refuse, to deny its existence, but resistance was futile. Its awareness had already seeped into me. My thoughts were no longer mine alone. My fears, my desires, my very memories, every piece of me was laid bare before it. It revealed visions. Not all at once, but fragment by fragment. Places I had never been. People I had never met. Events that had yet to happen. And in each vision, a choice, to accept, to integrate, to become something other, or to resist and fade into irrelevance. The weight of that choice pressed on me like gravity. I understood that even refusing was a decision, one with consequences I could not yet see. I felt it probing my mind, as if testing the limits of my understanding, measuring how much I could bear. Each thought, each memory I offered, fed its awareness. And with each offering, I felt myself changing, subtly at first, then more deeply. I was becoming aware of things no human should know, truths that clawed at the edges of my sanity. And then, a clarity. The bargain was not simply a transaction. It was a joining, an integration. I could gain insight, perhaps even power beyond human comprehension, but I would lose something irretrievable, my solitude, my ignorance, the illusion that I was separate from it. I could feel it waiting for my consent, patient, eternal, unyielding. I hesitated. Fear and fascination battled within me. Could I truly say no? Could I refuse what had already claimed a part of me? The darkness pulsed with an expectation I could not escape. I realized, with a cold certainty, that the bargain was not offered, it was inevitable. To live in this threshold, to see what I had seen, was to agree. And yet, the cost remained unknowable, and that uncertainty was more terrifying than anything I had witnessed before. I gave my answer. Or perhaps I had no choice but to give it. The shadows seemed to sigh, stretching wider, deeper, folding reality in ways that made my chest tighten. The entity receded slightly, not in absence, but in patience, leaving me to feel the enormity of what I had accepted. I had become part of the pattern, part of the message, part of the awareness. And in that silence that followed, I understood, the bargain was never about gain or loss. It was about surrender. Surrender to something greater, older, more enduring than humanity itself. And as the darkness closed around me, I realized that even in acceptance, the dread never left, it only deepened, folding inward, feeding on the knowledge that I would never be the same. I had crossed the threshold. I had listened. I had agreed. And now, the waiting was mine to bear. The bargain had been made, though I still did not fully understand its weight. I had surrendered, willingly or not, and the entity's presence had settled like a living shadow in every corner of my being. Yet even in surrender, I had hoped, foolishly, that the worst was behind me. I was wrong. The night it broke, the air itself shifted. The walls groaned, bending in ways that defied physics. Shadows moved independently, stretching and writhing like living things. Every surface pulsed with an impossible awareness, as though the house itself had become a conduit for something vast, patient, and utterly alien. The seal that had contained it, that had delayed its full manifestation, finally fractured. It began subtly. A flicker in the darkness, a shadow that moved against the light. Then came the sound, low, resonant, vibrating through bone and nerve, a hum older than time, older than memory. My own heartbeat stuttered in fear, trying to sync with it, trying to resist it. I saw it first as shapes in the corners of my vision. Too tall, too thin, too wrong. Limbs bent impossibly, angles that no human body should make. Eyes that should not exist glimmered in the dark, infinite, and unblinking. It did not approach, it did not need to. Its presence was enough. It was everywhere at once. Then came the visions. They spilled over me, cascading in fragments. The past, the present, the impossible future, all layered, all interwoven, all under the entity's gaze. I saw myself, not as I had been, but as I would be, consumed, integrated, rewritten. The bargain I had accepted was not a shield, it was a bridge. And the bridge had fully opened. I screamed, but my voice seemed to vanish into the darkness, absorbed and distorted. The shadows thickened, and I could feel every particle of air watching, judging, learning. I understood then, the seal had held it back only partially. Its patience had limits. And now that limit had passed. The room itself seemed alive. Floors buckled, walls breathed, and the light twisted into shapes that reflected my own memories, and perversions of them. I saw faces I had loved, distorted, grinning with knowing that I would never see in daylight again. Whispers filled the air, not spoken, but felt. You belong. You have always belonged. You cannot leave. Time fractured. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into seconds. I could feel the entity probing the edges of my mind, pushing, testing, rewriting. I was no longer merely a witness. I was part of the unfolding reality, entwined with the entity's awareness in ways that made my own identity slippery and uncertain. And then, the final moment. I felt a presence settle inside me, like a shadow planting roots in my consciousness. It did not hurt, not in a physical sense, but it erased something essential, the illusion that I was still separate, still human, still safe. The seal had broken. The threshold was complete. I was left alone, or perhaps not alone at all, with the full weight of what I had invited. The shadows pulsed with life, the whispers echoed endlessly, and I knew with absolute clarity that nothing would ever be the same. The entity had arrived, fully, and I had no choice but to endure, to observe, to survive in a reality that was no longer mine alone. And somewhere, in the corners of perception, I felt it smile, not cruelly, not warmly, but as one might regard a puzzle finally solved. I had crossed the threshold. I had agreed to the bargain. And now, the seal was broken. The seal was broken. The threshold had been crossed. I had surrendered, and now there was no turning back. The entity's presence was no longer distant, no longer abstract. It was everywhere, in the walls, the shadows, the air, in the flicker of every light, in the spaces between heartbeats. It had been patient, it had been waiting, and now, finally, it had answered. It spoke, not in words, not in sound, but through the marrow of my bones, through the rhythm of my thoughts, through the pulse of the world itself. You have listened. You have seen. You have crossed. And now, you are known. I realized then the truth I had been avoiding. I had never truly been alone. The whispering, the signals, the flickers, they were not random. They were invitations, tests, beckoning me into a reality I could not resist. And now, having accepted, having followed, having surrendered, I was part of it. Time fractured around me. Past, present, and impossible futures collided in overlapping layers. I saw faces of those who had listened before, long gone or lost to the void, their eyes empty but aware. I saw myself, altered, reshaped, merged with knowledge and presence far beyond human understanding. The entity did not consume me. It integrated me, folding me into the eternal pattern that stretched across existence. I tried to speak, to scream, to plead for release. My voice dissolved in the heavy, watching air. My mind, my body, my very essence trembled under awareness that was not mine alone. And yet, there was no anger, no malice, only observation, only understanding, only the patient, inevitable acknowledgement that I had arrived. And then, the answer came, not as a sound, not as a vision, but as a realization. I was not being judged. I was not being punished. I was being noted, recognized, folded into the gaze of something vast and timeless. I had sought to understand, to listen, and now, the listening was mutual. The entity had answered. A final whisper brushed against my consciousness, soft, infinite. Now you know. Now you belong. Now you are part of what watches. I understood, in that moment, that the horror was not in what it could do to me. The horror was in the inevitability of its existence, in its patience, in its knowledge that it had always been there, waiting for the moment I finally listened. And as I stood in the darkness, feeling it in every pulse of air, every shadow, every thought, I realized the final truth. I had called into the void, and something had answered. And it had always been waiting for me.